Jai to all of you. And thank you to this Mukishesh Madhukar Rao Tamgarge Trust and Panther for organizing this wonderful event today in the auspices of this beautiful center here. And the topic today is going to be what is called the concept of mind. And when I was thinking about this topic, that how do I speak about this topic, because when we talk about the mind, it is not a concept, it is the living thing, dynamic thing that's happening even now as I'm speaking and as you are listening. So I'm speaking with my instrument, organ, of mouth, my throat, and the sound waves that are being produced, the waves, the sound waves of the columns which are being produced in the air are striking your eardrums, and that particular oscillations are converted into the electrical signals, and that's how you listen to what I'm saying. Had I been speaking another language, for example, if I had been speaking, say, Chinese or Arabic or Korean or whatever language, even when there would have been this oscillation in the air, you wouldn't be able to understand a single word of what I'm saying, isn't it? So I'm talking about one particular sense, that is our auditory sense, ears. And beyond this, what is happening here in terms of the dynamic sort of event that is taking place here, how do we conceptualize something which is happening here and now? How do we conceptualize something which is so dynamic, which is so complex? And when I began, talking about something like mind in terms of just one sense of hearing or listening, it becomes so complicated. When we are dealing with the concept of mind or the reality of mind, you can imagine the kind of difficulties that we can encounter when we think about the visual field, when we think about the way we smell, when we think about the way we taste, and more important than this is how we conceptualize everything that we gather through our five senses and make it into a kind of an abstract concept, isn't it? So just to facilitate my discussion or talk further, I would like to take one very beautiful episode from the Buddhist history. It comes in, it is in the Surangama Sutra, very famous sutra, not so known here in India, but it's a part of the Chinese Buddhism for a long time. So when we talk about, in the Surangama Sutra, there is a very beautiful episode of Ananda is going for the arms rounds, and then he meets Matangi. It's a very beautiful woman, and Matangi tells her mother that she is enchanted by the beauty of Ananda, because Ananda is a very handsome disciple of the Buddha, very very good-looking man, and so is Matangi. Matangi is also a very good-looking woman, and when Ananda meets her, she's also intoxicated by her beauty, and he's so intoxicated by her beauty that he forgets his vows of celibacy. And according to the sutra, she is playing some kind of a tricks on Ananda's mind, and Ananda is drawn to Matangi, and they are so much drawn to each other that Ananda is at the verge of breaking his vow of celibacy. So according to the sutra, the Buddha, through his divine eye, Divyachakshu, he senses something is going wrong with Ananda, and he makes an arrangement to withdraw Ananda from there and bring him back to the monastery. Okay, and Ananda's spell is now gone, and he is now back to what is called the monastery. Now here, if you look at the whole episode and try to conceptualize, because this sutra is all about mind. So what does this sutra talk about is there is a form of Matangi, isn't it? According to the uh, studies of mind or whatever, there are forms like rupa, as we call it in the traditional Buddhist parlance. And the rupa is all about what we sense it through our senses, right? Through our eyes we sense something, we hear some beautiful sounds. Maybe Matangi might have said some beautiful words to Ananda, and her form was already very beautiful. She was a very beautiful woman. It goes both ways, okay? And looking at her form, there is a feeling in the mind of Ananda. Now that feeling, I'm going to talk a bit about feelings before I go on to more complex concepts of mind. The feeling is something very inherent to what we call our human mind. If we encounter some form, and form is about what we see, what we hear, what we taste, what we touch, and what we smell, isn't it? The whole sort of sensory device is as if kept on our shoulders, right? If you look at our head, it's like the whole sensory device is embedded in our head. So the form of Matangi, the feelings in the mind of Ananda, then he has these perceptions that she is a beautiful woman, isn't it? So based on the feeling arises the perceptions in the mind of Ananda, and based on that perception arises what is called the mental formation, that I want to now cohabit with her, isn't it? So you see this four aspects of form, feelings, perception, and then the mental formations, which are traditionally called, along with the consciousness, are called what is called the five skandhas, or the five aggregates. And they are very technical in nature, and they are all related to mind. So Ananda goes to the Buddha, and Buddha then asks him, Ananda, why did we choose to become a monk? And Ananda says that because you are my relative, and when I saw you with all your quote unquote 32 marks of divinity, and I saw your rupa, I saw your form, he describes the Buddha in terms of his golden body and so on and so forth. I was immediately drawn to you, and that's how I became a monk. Now this is a very interesting thing that's happening here. So the Buddha is asking then Ananda as to how did he see the form of the Buddha, through what instrument he saw the Buddha. Now there is, we can easily know what are those instruments by which we see something. So of course it's our eye and our conscious mind, right? So eyes and mind and the object coming together, giving rise to his perception of Buddha. So the Buddha probes very deeply into that, and he asks Ananda, where is your mind? Can you show me the mind which perceived the Tathagata? So then Buddha asks him, where is your mind? Whether it's in your body. Now this question is not just for Ananda. It is a question for all of us. Whether our mind is in our body. So when Ananda is probed like that, Ananda is not able to answer. Because if it's in the body, how do we see the things which are in the distance? We can see the stars sitting right here, isn't it? So where is your mind? Then Tathagata asks him, is your mind outside somewhere there? Is your mind, you simultaneously you raise these questions for yourself. Whether your mind is out there, perceiving the sky, for example. The answer is negative. We cannot say that our mind is outside us. Then the Buddha asks him whether your mind is within you and outside there. Even this question cannot be answered. And these are the questions not just for Ananda. These are the questions meant to be contemplated by all of us. And the third possibility, that mind exists somewhere else. That is neither within, without, in between, within and without, or somewhere else. So where is the mind? So the mind cannot be established through mere conceptualization. It's such a dynamic thing which we all experience all the time. Without the mind, we cannot sense, we cannot hear, we cannot see. We don't know what is the mind. So when we are talking about the concept of mind, we have to begin to probe very deeply into our own experiences. And if we look at the mind in terms of the Buddhist conceptualization of it, the Buddha says in the very first verse of the Dhammapada, Mano Pubbangama Dhamma Manosetta Manomaya Mansache Padutthena Bhasati Va Karoti Va Tatonang Dukkha Manveti Chakham Va Vahato Padam. Isn't it? The Buddha says that the mind precedes all our experiences. Isn't it? Mind leads to suffering and mind leads to the highest supreme happiness. It all depends on the mind, but it depends on the quality of our mind. The mind which is impure, the mind which is distorted, the mind which doesn't accord with the reality is always going to produce the suffering. If the mind is stainless, if the mind is pure, that mind is always conducive to our greatest welfare and happiness. So you see, this is something that we can begin to understand, that the mind is very difficult to conceptualize because it self-conceptualizes. Without mind you cannot conceptualize anything, isn't it? So I think this is a very important aspect of the mind that we have to understand. So if we really want to understand the mind, we have to look at what's happening here and now. Because the mind which was in the past cannot be established now. The mind that is going to arise in the future cannot be established now. So if we really want to understand the mind or the quality of mind, the way it functions, we have to begin to understand the mind here and now as it is happening in this very dynamic situation. So why do we need to understand the mind? Do we need to understand the mind, or do we want to live in the oblivion that such dynamic phenomena, we cannot call it phenomena also, because these all terms and the words and the terminologies are conditioned, are created by the mind. As I said in the beginning, that if I use a language which no one can understand, then nothing will make sense, isn't it? So when we talk about the human mind, I'm going to go into that. Why do we need to understand the mind? Why we need to probe into mind? Why do we want to know the mind? Is because if we want the ultimate freedom, if we want to free the mind, which is of course no mind, isn't it? And isn't it fascinating to look at this particular phenomena, that there is a mind and the mind trying to liberate itself. And that's what the Buddha says, that the mind has a quality ingrained in it, that it craves for the liberation. It has both the aspect of ignorance and the aspect of the sublime reality. So as we are looking into mind, we can see that the mind functions on different levels. So now let's go back to the example that I began with. I'm talking to you in a particular language. Now how do you understand this language? And from where this language is coming? From my mouth. Isn't it? Is it just the vibration of the columns of the air that you're able to listen to me? Had I not got this training or the conditioning of mind to speak in a particular language, I wouldn't be able to speak that language, right? So we can look at the mind in terms of the true, this all conceptualization is just for the sake of clarity. Okay? The whole talk can be done by staying silence in the silence. I don't have to speak a word if I have to talk about mind. Let the reality unfold here right now. So, you see, there is what is called the surface mind and what is called the deep mind. So the language I am speaking, is ingrained in my mind through the training, through the practice, and you might be feeling that it's spontaneous, but it's not. Before I word it out through my mouth, a lot of processes are taking place inside me. There is a lot of inner talking going inside me. Even I cannot sense it, because it's happening at such a fast speed that I'm not even able to, understand the processes which are taking in my mind. The Buddha says that it's very difficult. It happens so fast that it's very difficult for us to separate these mental processes. Very difficult. And the science, of course, has gone a depth into that as to how the thoughts are produced. But even the scientific, exploration is not there, where it will give us the complete clarity as to where the thoughts are located. For example, people talk about the brain as the organ of mind. But if we look at the human brain, what is the human brain? Whether the brain is just here, or isn't my body the part of the brain? It is said that the eye is an extended brain. Your ear is an extended brain. Your tongue is an extended brain. So, what is the brain? What is the quality of that brain? How does it physically, created or evolved? According to the scientific facts, our brain has about 85 billion neurons. Now that's a mind-boggling number. 85 billion neurons is not a small number. There are just 8 billion people on the earth. 85 billion neurons, and their permutations and combinations, it becomes such a complex device. If we probe into our brain more deeply, we find that the what is called the spikes of electricities are flaring up in my mind, isn't it? So as I'm speaking, so many things, such a complex thing is happening inside me, in my brain. So many combinations are being made, isn't it? So how do we understand this complexities that is taking place in my brain? It's not easy to cognize what is the brain. So many permutations and combinations. The organ of eye itself is creating so many sparks in my brain, so many electrical signals. You can calculate the voltage of that electric signals which are being released in my brain all the time as I become conscious, isn't it? So, understanding the brain as a basis of the consciousness, is another area, and it launches us in the area of understanding what is the material form and what is the immaterial form. What is called the mind, and there is, as in the Western philosophical world, a conflict between this, whether the mind is separated from the matter, or the matter is separated from the mind, whether they are two distinct entities. According to the Buddhist conception of mind, and it's very interesting conception of mind that we will be looking at is, you see, the Buddha says that there is a superficial mind which is happening now, here and now. As you listen to me, it's happening here and now. But for this here and now happening, there has to be some kind of a habit to my mind. There is a need of certain conditioning to my mind. The mind of the human being is different from the other minds. It's not that the octopus doesn't have a mind. There are now studies which talks about the consciousness of an octopus, or the consciousness of a bird, or a consciousness of a dog, isn't it? But even a preliminary look at the minds of the animals around us, the other sentient beings. Of course, they sense, they have the sensory organ. But despite of that, if you look at the way the human mind has evolved, it has got basically two qualities which are not available to the animals. One is our mind is capable of communicating in a very abstract way. That's language, isn't it? So we have a capacity to think through the signs and the symbols. Now, for example, now I call this a glass, right? Now this word glass is a word in English. In Marathi, there will be a different word. In Hindi, there will be a different word. In Chinese, they will call it base or whatever. So you see, this is what I call a glass, and this material I call a glass, isn't it? But whether what is this out there is always mediated by my senses. We exactly don't know what is there unless it is mediated by my senses. Do you see what I'm saying? The animals will make several sounds to communicate for their survival, but they have no way by which they can conceptualize this particular thing as a glass. Right? So that's number one aspect, that our minds are capable of thinking in terms of the size. Number two, our mind has the capacity to make the tools. Now you look at around us, everything around us is basically created by our mind. These are all tools, isn't it? I cannot drink, it will be very inefficient if I drink the water with my hands. We at some point of time we might be doing it or directly. But now we have this instrument of glass through which I am able to drink the glass, the water from the glass. So the point that I am trying to make here is the human consciousness or the human mind is very different from the minds of the animals. Okay, we have this ability to learn the language, and the learning of the language. You see, the languages might have come from some sounds, some prelingual sounds like ahs and oohs, and the exclamation when we got, when we faced some danger, right? Or we wanted to invite some kind of or mate. But eventually those words, those sounds were arranged into what we know as the consonants and the vowels. And then another invention of the human mind, if you look at the archaeology of mind, is to have these sounds written in terms of the alphabets, orthography, isn't it? So you see, even if we are now here because of these two points in the evolution of the human mind, we are able to know what is happening in the past, what has happened in the past. We can leave the signals for the future generation, isn't it? So the human mind, as we are looking at it today, has these two abilities. Number one is the ability to think in terms of the signs and the symbols, right? And another is to make the tools. Now let's come back to our example. As I said, the glass up here. Now we don't know the reality of this. Whatever I know about this is mediated by my eyes, isn't it? And if you look at the basic, the processes of the visual, processes, we see that the way we perceive this, the cat might perceive it differently. The dog might perceive it differently. Even here, when we are sitting here, our minds might be functioning in a different way. Maybe our minds might not be here and now. Maybe we are, somewhere else in our minds, isn't it? So when we look at the superficial aspect, and when we look at the deep mind, okay, so by superficial mind I mean the mind that in the realms of the senses, right? So let's look at this model of mind as to how it works. So through my senses I conceive something. But through my mind, that is mind, and the senses are extended minds, right? So through my mind, when this whole sensory data is brought into my mind field, I cognize, I perceive, and give it a sign, a verbal sign, or a sign, or a symbol, isn't it? And maybe we don't know that those symbols or the signs or the sounds are stored in this whole complex of the possibilities of the 85 billion neurons and their combinations, isn't it? So the sensory mind, the mind that creates the conceptualization or the perceptual field, and then there is a mind that always thinks in terms of the ego. We don't know whether the sense of I or ego is there in the animal consciousness, but if we look at our mind always go back to that referential point, me, right? My mind, it always goes back to that reference point. And as we are talking about the deep mind, the conditioned mind, the mind which has been evolving for billions of years. The mind that I have today is not product of some chance or accident, right? At this moment. Maybe in the beginning there was a chance when the life began to evolve. But if we see now that because of what is called the natural selection, our minds have been evolved from a very simple minds to a very complex mind. So my mind itself is a product of billions of years of evolution. Billions and billions years of evolution. If we want to put a date to that, the first virus, as they say, that began here, they say 4 billion years. The human being in this form, only 60,000 or odd years. Isn't it? We haven't had this form before. Even we cannot say we, because the reality is so dynamic that we cannot fix it, that this is the species which is never going to change. That's what Darwin found out. That the species evolved. There is no permanent form. There is no permanent mind. There is no permanent, what we can say, no permanence anywhere. But now this is a catch here. And this is a very interesting catch here. What is the catch here? Is because of this sign-making quality of our mind, we perceive the things as permanent. Do you see this final point? That why we perceive the world not as it is, but as stable, as permanent. Why? Why do we perceive the world like this? Because of our aspect of the mind that creates the signs. I have known Yogesh for like 20 years. He has changed a lot. He has gone through a lot of changes in his mind. But yet I meet him, I cognize him as Yogesh. We change all the time, isn't it? But because of this power of mind to, conceptualize, we get the semblance of permanence. But in reality, the things are not like that. However hard you try to, store the sounds that are happening around, you cannot. You see what I'm saying? Isn't it? But why do we feel? Why do we listen to the same music again and again? And one day, it becomes like, even if it's not there, we can listen to it. Even when the musical instruments are not there. Why do we? How can we listen to it? Because of these very complex systems of signs and symbols, which in Buddhism called the nimitta. What is called? Nimitta. Very interesting concept. In the Buddhist psychology, you will encounter many beautiful concepts like this, and I'm going to share some of those concepts with you today. I know it's a very complex topic, but it is the topic, that interests all of us. Because had it not been for our minds, we would have not been sitting here, we would have not been talking, we would not have been surviving itself. It's a magic of mind. Okay, so let's go back to the example of how the sensory world is created. So we don't know what is out there unless it is mediated by our senses. So the Buddhists take a position that we don't know what is up there. What is up there is only known, mediated by our senses. So that doesn't mean that when we talk about the mind in Buddhism, we are denying that the outer world doesn't exist. The point is, we don't know what is up there. What we know is that whatever up is there, it is not permanent. What we know that what is up there doesn't have anything which remains constant forever. And what we know for sure, that if we do not understand this nature of the world, and if we latch on or attach to something, that is surely going to produce this suffering. So why we need to know the mind? So that we can practice, so that we can cultivate, in the words of Baba Sahib Ambedkar, our minds. And the cultivation of the mind is our highest responsibility as a human being. So, not to take you further, the sensory consciousness, then your consciousness that creates the perception or the constancy, then your ego consciousness, and then your very deep mind that has this billions of years of habit energy stored in it. Isn't it? It's a whole evolutionary history inscribed in our mind. It's not an ordinary brain that we have got. No machine can produce it. It takes a deeper time to come to this particular stage in the evolution of the consciousness. Okay, so when we look at the deeper mind, the deeper mind is not your mind. It's the mind produced by great many causes and conditions, and we have no way to become aware of that mind, because we are always hovering in the sensory world. We are always wandering in the world, which the Buddha says, the world created by the senses. All the time. The Buddha says that, we have to find the ways to understand our minds deeply. The moment we understand what the mind is, we are free. We are not ensnared or enslaved by the mind. We are not ensnared or enslaved by these sensory objects. Now, it's not easy, because we are conditioned so much that it's very difficult for us to, come out of this sensory world. Isn't it? But the mind that we have has a quality. Isn't it? Though it's moving so fast, though it's going in all different directions with a tremendous speed, we can steal our mind. We can make our mind calm. We can make our mind without getting drawn in the sensory world, right? Right? The moment we begin to go deeper, stillness of our mind, the more we begin to see that we can no longer get attached to the signs and the symbols and the nimittas created by the mind. Now, the mind cannot arise without the object. And as I told you, we don't know what is out there. Okay, so even the objects that the mind takes hold of are produced by the mind. Right? So, not to make it very complicated, this topic itself is not an easy to talk about. But as you can begin to see that, you see, the mind arises by holding on to the object. Maybe it's sound, maybe it's a form, or maybe it's a test or whatever. The mind arises based on that. But if you imagine that the mind is no longer depending on what is called the 5 objects of the senses, the mind is free, then what would the mind attach to? Because as I said, that the mind arises depending on the objects. So then you have very subtle objects that your mind cognizes. Okay? And it goes the subtlety of attachment to the finer and finer, objects. I even should not call object. There is a very technical word in Pali called alambana. A very technical word in Pali called alambana. And then a stage comes where mind realizes that there is no point in playing this game. Okay? There is no point in playing this game of the world. And when the mind realizes that subtlety, that depth, the mind, is so still. It's so still. It's so calm. It cannot be swayed by anything. And when the mind cannot be swayed by anything, when the mind is not attached to anything, when the mind is not taking any object, gross or subtle, then the mind detaches. And when the mind detaches, it is said that that's the end of the mind. Now it's a very tricky concept. We started with what is called the mind, and now we are talking about the end of the mind. The mind doesn't arise. It's a cessation of the mind. Now, we shouldn't be scared about that, because that's not going to happen all of a sudden. That's not going to happen all of a sudden. There is an entire training that we need to undertake in order to come to the point where the mind doesn't arise. And when the mind doesn't arise, that is the mind. We cannot call it a mind. That's the Buddha's, if you want to call mind, you can call it mind. That's the mind, or whatever it is the experience of the enlightened person. That is the experience of niralamban. Having no object to attach to. Having thrown away all the conceptualization. Having thrown away all the ways by which we cognize. Now, we shouldn't be scared about that, because this mind that we are talking about, the mind that is free, the mind that is gone beyond, has certain qualities which the enlightened people have talked about. And I'm not going to go into that because that's going to be a very interesting topic, but I just want to bring to you something which is very important, is this, that we have this beautiful mind. We have this powerful, I don't know whether we can call it a gift, but we have this mind. And the mind can be trained. The mind that's going haywire and creating so many problems in the world by not able to cognize the way it is, by not able to know the way it is. And knowing is the ultimate quality of the mind. The bare attention, the awareness without holding on to any object. Is it possible? Is it possible to have that experience of not holding on to any object? The mind that is just mind, the bare awareness. Now, using a lot of Pali terminologies and a lot of Sanskrit terminologies, I would have spoken in a very different way, isn't it? But I wanted to communicate something very important to you, that the stillness of the mind is very important, and we can still our mind. There are practices which are taught by the Buddha, by which we can still our mind. When our mind is still, when our mind is withdrawn from this sensory world, when our mind is withdrawn from the concept making, quality, when our mind is released, And when our mind is not arising, Nirodha Samapatti, it's called the Nirodha Samapatti in the technical Pali language. So I would like to end here with basically two things. Is this, that we all have the responsibility towards our mind. And we know that we can steal our mind, we can calm our mind, we can make our minds very settled minds. Our minds are always agitated by the sensory experiences and by our own deep conditionings, by our deep habit energies. Our mind is always agitated. When our mind is full of anger, we cannot see the reality. When our mind is full of lust, we cannot see the way it is. We cannot steal our mind because it's fake. When our mind is dull, and the three things create the world, the liking, disliking, and being ignorant. This is what creates the world around us, isn't it? We don't, as I said, we don't know what is out there unless it is mediated by our consciousness. So the whole world, according to the Buddha, arises based on the arising of the mind. And when the mind is seized, the world ceases. You cannot walk to the end of the world by walking, but you can arrive at the end of the world by the cessation of mind. And this is what has been taught. So basically, there are two practices by which we can begin to train our mind, is by stealing, calming our mind, and seeing more deeply, more clearly into our experiences. So in the traditional Buddhist parlance, it's called the samatha and the vipassana. But I'm not going to go into that today. I'm going to touch upon something very interesting, that the images that have been taught by the Buddha, for example. He said that the world is a great mirror, isn't it? And when our mind is purified by the ego consciousness, whatever, the whole world is reflected as a pure mirror, great mirror, isn't it? When our consciousness becomes very pure, amala, there is no stain in the consciousness. That consciousness is like a great mirror. It reflects everything as it is. Otherwise, we are all judging all the time, likes and dislikes, right? But this consciousness doesn't judge. It's a great mirror consciousness, and the world is like a mirror. We are looking at the mirror, and there is a very beautiful couplet by the great poet who came from the Siddha Buddhist tradition, Kabir. It's a very great couplet. He has many couplets about the mind, and so all the great Siddhas and the Nathas and all Buddhist tradition, you will see great verses about the mind. But this is a very beautiful verse that I am going to say in Hindi, and then I'm going to try to translate in English. It says that apun ko apu hi visaryo. Apun ko आप ही विसरियो, भरमत भूमकी मरियो. 6-7 words. It was very beautiful. जैसे सोनहा काच मंदिर में भरमत भूमकी मरियो. What is the couplet? जैसे सोनहा काच मंदिर में भरमत भूमकी मरियो, अपुन को आप ही बिसरियो. So there is a story of a dog. He is deluded dog, Bharmat. He goes to the temple or whatever in the Shish Mahal, where there is a mirror. There is a mirror all over, and the dog enters there. When the dog enters in that room, full of mirrors, he sees his reflections everywhere. And what happens? He gets confused with himself. And he's barking at so many forms that of himself he is watching in the different mirrors. Likewise, when we look at the world, actually we are looking at our reflection out in the world. But we are always, either aggressively living in the world, or we are living with a very passionate attachment to so many things. But the reality, or the reality which is captured here by the great Kabir, जैसे सोना काच मंदिर में, सोना is a dog, sunak, as if सोना काच मंदिर में, in the temple of the mirrors, Dharmat, deluded, Vumki Mariyo, barking that dog noise. Because what happens? अपन को आप ही विसरियो, because he has forgotten himself, who he is. What is out there is just the reflection, isn't it? And the mirror is a very beautiful device to know. Narayan Guru, one of the great, in the sense of Kerala, he has so many things to talk about the mirror, isn't it? He says that the mirror, our reflection in the mirror is inert, is material, and that reflection cannot reflect back. And whatever is seeing the mirror, the image in the mirror, cannot see itself. Can our eye see itself? Can our mind be aware of itself? It can. But just look at this beautiful image of a mirror, where our reflection in the mirror, there is an eye, but that eye we see in the mirror is a dead eye, right? And the eye which sees that, we cannot see it. So what's happening there? What is happening there? So we have to bear this image of a great mirror in our mind as we are in the world. The mirror doesn't judge whatever is happening, whether it's beauty or ugliness or whatever. The mirror is just a mirror, a great mirror. Isn't it? It's a non-judgmental mind. It's the mind that reflects what it is, and that's the mind of the Buddha. And that's the mind that we can all aspire to attain to, because that possibility, as Kabir says, exists within each one of us. So, by the way of the final remarks on the topic today, this is a very, very complex topic. This is not an easy topic, isn't it? But as we reflect on these processes, as we try to find out where is the mind, that's a koan for you. In the Zen Buddhist tradition, that's a koan. Where is your mind? What is your mind? So I will leave you with a story that there is a Zen master and his disciple goes to him and he says that my mind is restless. Please give me some rest to my mind. The Zen master says, you bring your mind to me, I will put it at rest. You bring your mind to me, it's my duty to put it at rest. Can we bring our mind to even ourselves so that we can put it to rest? Jai Bhim, Namo Buddha. So should we take on some questions or what?
Yes. Thank you, Mangesh sir, for illuminating talk. Although he kept saying that it's a very complex topic, but we all share some experience with something called mind, and then we are all troubled by that. Those who think are already like trouble beings. So, and I know this is something, a beginning that we will take with us, that he has given enough stimulus to us to think about what is mind, like how do we look at it and all. So, thank you Mangesh sir so much for such an illuminating talk. And if you have a question, you can ask question now.
I know it's not easy to even comprehend, okay, but
whatever
it's
we
an
can have is
exploration.
out of mind. So
It's an exploration. There is nothing to judge. Let's be a great mirror now.
I don't have a question, but like it's just a remark that it's a very interesting way that you have the thoughts on how you perceive it or in some way that how mind works and what the question that you put out was that what is the mind? The very big thing that I think once in a life I think all of us have had that thought that we have that all these questions that arise. What is life? We have asked when we read Buddha on this conversation. I asked with Anand, what is life? What is this dukkha? All these questions. Buddha bombarded us with all these questions. So I think it's a good way to start. Sort of, it's like a treasure. We have to go find that treasure. So it's very interesting.
Good comment. Yes, brother. You came all the way from Amravati, no? Thank you for coming.
Pleasure. So, I'm curious about our mind's ability to perceive something in good or bad way. So, for example, let's I choose to tell my mind that by inhaling I will kindness, and by exhaling I will hate. So our mind is so used to follow some kind of wiring.
Yeah.
It's like pursuing something as bad or as good. So I'm interested in whenever I feel angry or whenever I get drawn in some strong emotions, I try to be aware about my breath.
Yes.
And whenever I feel hate about something, then I try to be aware about my breath, and I try to tell myself that I'm inhaling kindness and exhaling hate. So sometimes I jumble. Sometimes my mind, all of a sudden, there are some instances where I can my mind was like I'm inhaling hate and exhaling kindness. So I try to perceive good things. I try to perceive. So I'm interested in knowing the practical meditation or something like that, so that I can train my mind in pursuing good things.
Right. See, there are many ways by which you can steal your mind. Many ways. The point is to empty your mind. Like you are sitting here. So though you come from Amravati, you empty your mind of the perception of Amravati. Right? You are here, right here now, sitting in this place, isn't it? So the point is to empty the mind. It's not easy, isn't it? Empty the perception, not easy. Empty the feelings, not easy. Because our mind is always acting in two modes, liking and disliking. Always two modes. Or sometimes it's dull. And the mind that is trained to like is called, raga. Okay, so when you like something, you create another world. When you dislike something, you create another world. Right? So in these two things, the raga and dosa, your mind is always moving, liking and disliking. Right? Now the extreme form of liking is a kama, is a blind neurotic craving for something. Right? And the extreme form of disliking is what? Krodha. That's why if you look at the traditional, Zen tradition, they always talk about these two words, kama, krodha. Isn't it? So either we are hating something, either we are pushing something out, or we are trying to acquire something. This is going all the time. Okay? Or sometimes our minds are so dull, ignorant, and that's why moha comes. So the raga, moha and dosha, like, dislike and neutral mind, are actually creating the world. Right? So how to settle in the reality of the mind? The source, if we want to borrow a concept from the movies, how to go back to the source. before this everything takes place, isn't it? So there is a very beautiful poem, the Buddhist poem by Musuku, which I recently listened to. He says that when you are in the world, why are you hating and loving? Okay, indulging. Grina and Mili. Why are you hating? And why are you, indulging? Isn't it? Why are you, so much full of craving? Why are you so much full of hatred? So what should we do with our mind? So there is a beautiful simile here, that the mind is equated with the deer or mriga. And it said that the mrig goes back to its original home without leaving the footstep, without leaving the traces of its footstep. This is a very beautiful example of how we can go back to the mind, that Buddha mind, that mind which is we can call original mind. What in some of the Buddhist tradition they call original mind. How do we can go back to that? Is there a path to that? The Buddha says you cannot see the path like you cannot trace the path of the bird in the air. He said there is no path to that. We have to rush to that without rushing. Isn't it? So when our mind is liking and disliking, indulging and rejecting, happening all the time. It's happening all the time, rejecting and indulging, happening all the time. And ignorance, happening all the time. But how do we go back to that mind? One of the ways by which we can do that is to continuously train ourselves in what is called the mindfulness of breathing. Now there are many ways to do the mindfulness of breathing. One of the ways that I prefer is to what is called the Buddha method. Isn't it? Like you cultivate the mindfulness of your breathing, but at the same time of the Buddha. So how do you do it? When you inhale, you say Buddha, and when you exhale, you say Tu. Isn't it? So it has a very beautiful function. When you sit quiet, when you sit just like the Buddha, it calms your body. Isn't it? That pose of the Buddha is not random. It's beautiful pose. A person sitting in cross-legged with his spinal cord upright, and sitting. It's a beautiful universal pose that attracts everybody. Isn't it? And now that's your body. But what do you do about your mind? Because your mind is running here and there. So you bring back your mind to your breathing. But what about your process of thinking, cognizing? So you use this word Buddha. Because the words are the food for the thoughts. Isn't it? So this way you try to calm or still your body, speech and mind. You got it? So one of the methods that works for me is this, that when you inhale, say Buddha, when you exhale, Dho. Okay, so you have the words. So your mind, which is thinking with the words, is also arrested. Your mind is also being aware of your breathing, and when you are sitting still, your body is already still. So there are many ways by which one can learn to go back to that original mind. It's not going to happen in a day. As we have seen how complex is the human mind, the surface mind and the deep mind, and so many arrays of range of consciousness in between. And if you look at the complex Buddhist text on mind, you'll find that the mind is divided further into so many planes. So many planes. And the mental states are divided into so many mental states that we encounter all the time, like anger, delusion, hatred, love. Isn't it? So the Buddhist psychology goes much more into the complex details of the consciousness, which is not we can explain in a very short period of time, but you get an idea, isn't it? That how this mind can become, how we can end the mind. And that's why the mind of the Buddha is called Lokuta, the mind which is gone beyond. We cannot even call it a mind. Right? There's something that only we can experience. We cannot conceptualize it. Okay? So that's the right practice. If you look at the latter Indian philosophical literature, so in the practices like Kabir and Ray, they talk about Ardha and Urdhva. They said you establish your mind lagan lagi in the Ardha and Urdhva, but you don't know what is the form behind that, because that cannot be conceptualized. The moment you try to conceptualize, the moment you try to like, dislike, it's gone. Okay? I think we have 1 hour. Done? You have any question?
Just not a question really, but by listening to you, I had so many thoughts coming in my mind, and one of the thought was, is mind get into this what do I call as comfort zone, and how do you differentiate with that comfort zone of the mind with the calmness which you are talking about? So how these both can be differentiated? Because to me, it looks like it's the same thing. Maybe I'm wrong.
No, you are right. You are right. See, as I was talking about you, that the mind arises with the attachment to the mind object. So that those objects can be the sensory objects, but at the same time, the concepts or the ideologies or the way we are caught up in some ideas, isn't it? And I told you that the mind has quality because of this science making ability of human mind. We have this semblance of permanence, right? Because if I don't have a word for it, isn't it? I call it a glass. Then my mind makes this object appear to me as permanent. But the reality of this glass is that it's ever changing, but I am not able to cognize it, right? So the human mind is, because to escape from this habit energies, it needs a lot of efforts. So as you said, it tries to find comfort in various habits, thinking that they are permanent, right? Some kind of escape from the reality, isn't it? It's very difficult to face the reality, as I told you. You imagine that all the time you're perceiving, cognizing, thinking, speaking, and imagine the mind which is gone beyond that. It looks scary, right? Isn't it? But if you look at it from the point of view of the nirvana, that if we can have this liberated mind, which even we cannot call a mind, it will be a very different experience. You will be free from suffering, right? So the comfort depends on different conditionings of the mind. For you, something might be comfort to you, that you like to latch onto it all the time, because you don't want to face the bigger reality. It happens with us all the time. When we see that somebody around us die, our close friends, or sometimes we are shocked. Isn't it? So many people die around us all the time. But we don't think that it's going to happen to me ever. Right? Simple things that are happening around. The people change. We change. Isn't it? But we find the comfort in the habit energy, which gives us the perception of permanence, semblance of the permanence, semblance of something inside it which is inherently not going to change. Right? So we all fall into that trap of finding comfort here and there. But if we really want to, and that's the source of suffering. That's how the suffering is created. Because we take for granted what is impermanent as permanent. What is not me as mine. Right?
Sir, are you finished?
Yeah.
Please. My question is very abstract, and I will try my best to simplify it. So when we talk about mind, like we say, mind is conscious, right? And mind is taught how to love, how to hate, all different kinds of emotions. And we as humans, we teach Like, we teach our kids, our children, and so on and so forth. And then they evolve. They develop their own mind and they function in a society. So if we look in the contemporary times, right? So we are living in an era where artificial intelligence is also coming very prominently.
Right.
It's taking a huge space in our life. And artificial intelligence is also taught in some form or the other. If you ask, let's say, a racist question to artificial intelligence, so it will give you a very academic answer. It will say like, I cannot elaborate on this or something like that. So what humans are doing, they are also teaching artificial intelligence, right? To how to function in a society. So can we say that in future AI can evolve to have its own consciousness, because it is also taught how to love, how to hate, and so on and so forth. So yes, that will be my question.
See, I think it's a very good question, and I'm not an expert in AI. Or, I won't be able to give the answer. Okay. Now, when you say that the human mind, when we are born, so our mind is not abstract. When we interact with the society, our mind is a social mind. The language that we speak, the conventions or the habits that we borrow from the society. In the family we are born, in the company of the people we live, right? So our mind is not an abstract, right? It is a social mind, it's conditioned mind. That's why I'm able to speak a language, right? That's why I speak one particular language. Had I been born in another country, I would have been speaking a different language, right? My social realities might be different, right? So the mind, people say there are debates like, it's when a child is born, whether it's a blank slate or whether we come up with something already. So people say that, we have this malleable mind, the mind of a child, those who are fathers or mothers, they will know. It's very malleable, isn't it? You can train it, you can condition it the way we like it, isn't it? If you put an infant or a small child in a situation, even born in India, put it in Africa, they will grow up listening to Swahili and speaking the Swahili, right? Taking the convention of that particular social setting. So mind is a social and very trainable. It's very, very impressionable, isn't it? It's very plastic. It's very plastic. We can learn new language, right? We can learn different social ethos. We can learn different skills. So that the number one thing is the mind is very plastic. Now, as I said, that the human mind has evolved through the deep time, right? So the information, if we have to use this word information, inside our head is very complex. As I said, 85 billion neurons and their permutations and combinations. You can imagine the complexity there is. Now look at the machines, what's happening there. Isn't it?
It's also like
so the point is, can the human consciousness be created with the information processing at this moment? Isn't it? We can train to a great extent. Like Google, you put a question and you get an answer, right? Now that's a information system, information retrieval and memory system. So what is the human memory system? Where is the memory located? In what form? How it is wired, everything. Isn't it? The scientists are researching and there are certain questions and some plausible answers coming up. But it's very difficult. But we know how the memory is stored in the robot. We know how AI works. Isn't it? A loop, like learning, deep learning. Isn't it? But the feeding is done by who? Who is feeding that information? You see what I'm saying? Who is feeding that information? So then the question comes, can it acquire what we call, just discussed about, ego conscious, I consciousness, the referential consciousness? This is the language. It's all about I. If we remove the I, how do we speak? When I say I am going there, who is going there? You see what I'm saying? So for example, the more romanticized, I love you. And Roland Barthes analyzes it. Who is I? Who is you and what is love? You see? So the conditions are so deeply ingrained in our minds. Now can this be done to a machine? Like for example, if you look at our doctor's friend will be able to tell you, it's a very complex machine, generating the power within itself. Isn't it? It's a whole powerhouse. I told you, billions of sparks as I speak. So much voltage. Right? Right or wrong? Now, can a machine like this, it is a self-perpetual machine for some time, our human body, right? Then it breaks down and collapses. Right? But we derive the power, we eat food, I don't know how it's really for the machine. No, I'm not in a position to answer the question. But I think the human consciousness is very complex than what is happening in terms of the deep learning, or it's very complex. It's more creative.
So, why I came across this question was because when you were speaking, so we see human rights activists, right? They are human rights activists, and we say they're human because they are working or they are thinking for the people who have consciousness. Humans have consciousness. So in a similar way, in future, not just in future, in contemporary time, we are also looking at people who claim themselves to be robot rights activists. So how, how we are looking at what kind of robots are being developed. Some they are being kind of developed just to satisfy human lusts, and and in future, so why do we need it made me think, why do we need robot rights activists if the robots don't have consciousness? That was one of my questions that came into my mind. And can of course this humans are the ones who have made artificial intelligence. But what if artificial intelligence starts developing itself? What if it goes to that point where it starts developing itself? And if it does start developing itself, can we say that it has developed consciousness?
I think these are the questions for the future. And as I said, I am not in the position to answer this question. I am not an expert in AI. I can talk about whatever I learned from about the consciousness. And I reckon that consciousness is very complex. It cannot be replicated. We have not been able to create the mind in the laboratory.
Yeah.
We even don't know what is the mind. Forget creating the mind. We even don't know what is the mind, right? So let's end here with permission of Yogesh ji. Yogesh ji?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, okay.
Now a question.
Yes.
Last question.
Last question.
So Baba Sahib always emphasized on mind. That he develops the cultivation of mind with the object of our life, and also caste is a notion of mind. So this evolution and counter evolution is also clashes of minds.
Yes, it's a clashes of ideas. It's a clashes of the wrong perception. It's a conflict between Sammaditya and Vichaditya. Right? So there is a dikti which says that the human beings are unequal. But at the level of the mind, you cannot say that people are equal or unequal. Right? But the social conditioning makes people feel that they are higher or lower. While the position of the mind of the Buddha would be that there is no higher, there is nobody higher than me or lower than me or even equal to me. Isn't it? We are all unique. Isn't it? We are not comparable to anyone. There is no scale by which I can compare myself with you in the ultimate analysis. You are endowed with that consciousness. You are the consciousness, you are the mind. You know, if free, it can be the Buddha, right? Everybody can be, if they are freed from these likes and dislikes. It begins with the likes and dislikes, isn't it? And the caste is about likes and dislikes. It's a notion. It's a social conditioning. It's a system of thoughts that's being imposed through a lot of cultural notions. And you know, I think it's not difficult to break away from that. You know? That's why Baba Sambedkar emphasizes on cultivation of mind. Once we know who we are, then we will stop barking at the images of so many dogs in the mirror, right? And with that realization comes the great compassion. It's automatic. And with the great compassion comes the realization of that vision. So if your mind, as he was saying, is able to have this compassion towards other minds, then you are free. So it works both ways. Compassion is a great liberator. If we want immediate release of the mind, turn it upside down. We are always focusing on our ego, me, myself, making ourselves the center of the universe, which we are not. But we have this semblance of being a center, because that is how we perceive the world, isn't it? We can never see our face or head, isn't it? But through this, I can look at the infinite directions. You know, only within the mirror I can see my head. But now, as I'm sitting here, as you are sitting there, what is here? Here, just imagine what is here. What is here? Just imagine on your shoulders. So, good question, Sandeep ji.
It's not a question actually. I want to have something. So I'm using the app called Headspace.
Yeah, I heard of it.
Yeah. So it is very good app as far as meditation is concerned. It's amazing app. So what I'm requesting you is, see, this conversation is very, I would say, a very higher level conversation. The people who are aware a bit about their mind or something like that. So the people who don't know basics of it. So I think we could do something to train them right from scratch. So I think Headspace app is very good, to look at it and we could, I think,
That's a good idea. We need centers which can train people,
yeah.
isn't it? You're right, and we should take advantage of our new technologies to teach, to discuss, to bring people together, to exchange ideas, isn't it? And in the end, we become our own apps.
So, thank you, Modesh sir, for such a beautiful talk. It's like we are living with so much of fog in front of our eyes in our time, and this talk is like somebody came and wiped something so we can see through. So this is almost like that. So thank you so much for such a beautiful, such a brilliant and very thoughtful talk. On behalf of Practice for Communication and Nampu Collectives, I would like to gift this book to speaker, Yogesh sir. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Yogesh. Thank you. And thank you so much for inviting.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.